a lot of super topics on that. I noticed something on engineered barriers and the issues there and how we can learn from different organizations. In my last year in Region 1, we were studying an engineered barrier for call it a little New Jersey dump site that nuclear materials was left with the state of New Jersey as they went agreement state. And we promised them an engineered barrier for the top of that, and the state is still wrestling with whether that's appropriate for long-term disposal of what was left there from construction activities in the 60s. So once again, I applaud this organization. I appreciate your effort and work, and I just look forward to a good two-day conference, and I thank you for the time to open it up. Thanks, Bill. Anybody really travel by train? Okay. Metro, I don't know if it works.
Thank you, Brian. Our next speaker will be Dr. Joseph Fixel. He's a native of Montreal. He began his career at DuPont of Canada and later served as Director of Decision and Risk Management at Arthur D. Little Incorporated and was Vice President for Lifecycle Management at Patel. He's an internationally recognized authority on sustainability and resilience with over 25 years of research and consulting experience for multinational companies, government agencies, and consortia such as the World Business Council for Sustainable Development. He's published over 70 refereed articles, several books, and is a frequent keynote speaker at conferences. Currently, he is on a special appointment at the US EPA, helping to incorporate systems thinking into the agency's research and development programs. Joseph?
Thank you, Bill. Good morning, everybody. Thank you for inviting me here. I did see a few familiar faces. I am on loan to US EPA currently, and you'll note the disclaimer there. What I'm going to talk about today are my views only. I run the Center for Resilience at Ohio State, and I don't have a lot of time to talk about resilience today, but we can talk about it later in the day if you're interested. And by the way, please do not ask me any questions about the football program at Ohio State. Okay, so I'm going to talk about sustainability at US EPA. You may be aware that over the last couple of years, EPA has been going through a major transition, at least within the Office of Research and Development, and now it's touching the rest of the agency as well. Our Assistant Administrator for Research, whose name is Paul Anastas, came on board with a vision, a very bold vision, that he wanted to make all EPA research focused on the topic of sustainability, which is a huge topic. And he insisted that, indeed, sustainability is the #1 challenge facing our economy and our society today, and that EPA is the only agency, really, that is positioned to address this challenge head-on, and that we needed to rethink how we do research and make it relevant to these very large, grand challenges of sustainability. And Paul asked me to come on board to help with this, which I have attempted to do. I've been doing some interesting work, both at a conceptual level and at a practical level, actually doing some modeling, which I will share with you today. I'm not going to preach to you about sustainability. I assume you're familiar with the concept and the idea of the 3 pillars of sustainability. The word rolls off the tongue quite often nowadays, and you hear a lot of people talk about it. It is actually a very complex subject. If we want to think about the interactions among our economic, environmental, and social systems, that rapidly gets to be a very complex discussion. And if you want to do modeling here, it's pretty challenging to take into account all the different factors and the dynamics of these different systems. So, while at the very conceptual level, it makes sense, yes, we want economic, environmental, and social well-being, and we want them all together. When you start to break it down and deconstruct it, it becomes much more daunting. So I will share with you some of the things we have done to address this. When Paul first came on board, he commissioned the National Academies of Science and National Research Council to do a study called Sustainability and the EPA. And this actually was Lisa Jackson, our administrator, who presented this challenge to the National Research Council, saying, can you please help us to get beyond the traditional paradigm of risk management? We know risk management is important. We can't stop worrying about risks to humans and wildlife and so forth associated with pollution and other types of environmental damage, if you will. However, there are other more complex problems that cannot be addressed by these traditional risk management methods or risk assessment methods. And so we need new science, we need new approaches that are going to help us to grapple with these new challenges. And the National Research Council responded with a report. It's a nice piece of work. It was just published last September. And it suggests how EPA can take on a broader perspective. They defined what they call a sustainability assessment and management process, which includes risk management as a component, but it goes well beyond that. And what we've been doing since the publication of this report, and actually even before that, is trying to prepare the tools and the analytics, if you will, that will help us to practice sustainability assessment and management. Oops. So we've been trying to take what we call a systems approach. I know many of you in the room probably consider yourselves systems scientists and are knowledgeable about systems approaches. And I'll be interested in your questions and comments later on. What I see as a systems approach is basically a comprehensive way to understand the dynamics of the different systems in which we operate, in which we function. And all of these systems that I list here, examples are economic systems, a company is a system, the US economy is a system, ecological systems, of course, and societal systems like cities or social networks. So all of these systems have structure, they have function, they have fairly complex dynamics, and they're interdependent. They interact. So how do you make sense out of all this? There is no single scientific discipline that has the capacity to analyze all these different systems. This needs to be a transdisciplinary enterprise involving a lot of different scientists and scholars from other fields, including social sciences, to understand how to, first, to understand the behavior of these systems, and secondly, how do we actually manage them and steer towards a sustainable society. Now, the systems approach, if you're able to capture the important details of these systems, then you can start to understand the potential hidden consequences of our actions. In the past, we've been guilty of not looking sufficiently at the broad systems implications of our actions, and we have been disappointed. We have failed to anticipate consequences. There are many examples I could cite, such as MTBE, which seemed like a great idea at the time, or like corn ethanol, which seemed like a great idea at the time. So, I don't want to get into the whole controversy over these things, but the fact is we're not that good about understanding the hidden factors and the systems implications of our actions. In particular, we have been going down a path as a society, and this is true globally, not just within the US, of ignoring our ecosystems, what we call natural capital, largely ignoring them, and not taking into account the degradation that's occurring as a consequence of economic growth, industrialization, urbanization. And so we have unwittingly, in fact, jeopardized our future growth and prosperity by essentially creating adverse impacts that only recently we have started to understand. That is fundamentally the sustainability problem. You may be familiar with the Millennium Ecosystem Assessment, which was published about 6 years ago, which talks about the different ecological services or ecosystem services that we depend upon. Again, I don't have time to go through all this. There are many different services provided by nature. Basic provisions such as food, fuel, and fiber, natural cycles that regulate our environment, and even cultural and spiritual services, all of which mankind depends upon. We take most of these for granted. They're outside the economy. Some people call these externalities because they are not priced as part of our economy. So when we operate our industrial supply chains, we don't actually take into account the hidden costs associated with the consumption or degradation of these services. And that's part of what a systems approach needs to take on, to embrace and internalize those effects or those impacts. Now, I've been working on what I call the triple value model, which is something that actually comes out of work that I did with OECD a number of years ago. It's a way to understand these interacting systems, starting with a very simple model and then gradually becoming more complex, more detailed, and richer as we drill down. And it starts with a very simple concept, which is the traditional economic concept of economic capital and social capital. And the idea here is that industries can grow by investing in capital, by producing goods and services that are valued by society. Industry creates jobs for society, and people spend their income on goods and services. And so you have this sort of happy cycle going on where you can have continuing growth and prosperity. However, this is the classical economic model, and in the past few decades, we've realized that there's a missing component to this model. There's a whole community of what we call ecological economists who pointed out that you must take into account the environment. So let's add in the environmental component. Now it becomes a little more complex. Excuse me. First of all, the environment is a life support system for both industrial and social systems. We cannot get along without it. We cannot survive without the environment. And yet we have pretty much taken it for granted. Like I said, we assumed that all of these goods and services that come from nature were essentially free. Now that we realize that they're constrained, they're limited, and in fact they're threatened in many cases, we need to figure out how we're going to take these into account. We have to value natural capital, not just economic capital. And so that means we have to start to understand the cycles of consumption and waste generation and pollution. And you can see here that there are two major cycles going on. Basically, these are both negative cycles. We're over-harvesting ecosystem services, and we're over-generating in terms of waste and emissions. Most of the materials and energy that move through our economy end up as waste. And so a lot of that waste actually degrades the environment. But the point is we're probably utilizing way more material than we actually need. If we were smart about this, we should learn to live within our limits. And hopefully we could protect natural capital and still enjoy good quality of life. So this is the fundamental sustainability challenge. Now conceptually this makes sense, and actually I could explain this to a third grade audience and they would get it too. This is very straightforward, but the devil's in the details. So I'm going to share with you one example of how we've applied this model to a water resource problem. This is ongoing work within EPA. We've been working with EPA New England, which is Region 1. So here we look at the flow of water resources. Now there are lots of resources flowing around in this value model, of course, materials, energy, and so forth, but let's focus on water. Water has a lot of economic uses. Our economy couldn't function without water. And also water is essential for human communities. However, again, we use lots of water. We use it to irrigate golf courses, and now we're going to be using water to do hydrofracking and so forth. So we consume a tremendous amount of water. There's a huge amount of water used simply for cooling in energy generation, as you know. And so that, while most of that water is returned to the environment, it is heated, it has impacts, as you know. And so we have a lot of runoff and wastewater. We generate a lot of potable water. We treat water that we end up not drinking. And so we're fairly wasteful in our use of water. There are lots of ways that people have talked about improving our management of water resources. And you can see here